I never thought my decision to store snow tires in my garage would turn into a 6-month battle with the most vindictive homeowners association in northern Michigan. But here I am, sitting in my lawyer's office with a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. My name is Xavier Zimmerman, and I bought my house in the Pinewood Estates subdivision outside of Traverse City 3 years ago. It was a solid investment, a nice 3-bedroom ranch with a 2-car garage and a finished basement. The neighborhood seemed quiet enough, mostly young families and retirees who kept to themselves. The HOA fees were reasonable at $60 a month, and I figured I could deal with the usual nonsense about lawn heights and mailbox colors. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. The trouble started last November, right after the first major snowfall of the season. I own a 2018 Ford F-250 with 4-wheel drive, and like any sensible person living in Michigan, I keep 2 sets of tires, one for summer and one for winter. The winter tires were on my truck, and the all-season tires were stacked neatly in my garage, right next to my tool bench. They were not blocking anything, not creating a hazard, just sitting there in a perfectly organized corner taking up maybe 4 square feet of space. That is when I got the first letter. It arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon, printed on official Pinewood Estates HOA letterhead with a return address that made my stomach sink. The letter informed me that I was in violation of Section 7.3.2 of the HOA bylaws, which apparently prohibited the storage of automotive parts in garages that were visible from the street. I read that line 3 times, trying to figure out how anyone could see into my garage. My door was always closed except when I was pulling in or out. I called the number at the bottom of the letter and got connected to Margaret Whitmore, the HOA president. Margaret was 52 years old, had short blonde hair that she kept in that classic soccer mom style, and spoke with the kind of sugary condescension that made my teeth hurt. She explained to me in excruciating detail that someone had reported seeing my tires during one of her routine neighborhood inspections. Apparently, she had been driving past my house right as I was pulling into my garage after work, and she had spotted the tires through her car window in the 3 seconds my garage door was open. "Mr. Zimmerman, I understand this might seem like a minor issue to you, but we have standards in this community," she told me over the phone. "If we let one person store tires, then someone else will want to store engine blocks, and before you know it, the whole neighborhood looks like a junkyard." I tried to reason with her. "Margaret, they're just tires. They're not even dirty. I swap them out twice a year. Where else am I supposed to keep them?" "That's not my problem," she said, and I could hear her typing on a keyboard in the background. "You have 14 days to remove the tires from your property or face a fine of $50 per day. You could rent a storage unit. Many of our residents do." The nearest storage unit facility was 8 miles away and cost $75 a month. I did the math quickly in my head. That would be $900 a year just to store 4 tires for 6 months. It was absolutely insane. I decided to fight back. I dug out my copy of the HOA bylaws, all 73 pages of them, and started reading. Section 7.3.2 did indeed mention automotive parts, but the specific wording was vague. It said that excessive automotive parts and mechanical equipment could not be stored in a manner visible to the general community or which creates an unsightly appearance. The key word there was excessive. 4 tires, neatly stacked in a corner, did not seem excessive to me. Additionally, they were only visible for the brief moment when my garage door was opening or closing, not to the general community. I wrote a formal response letter citing these points and requesting a hearing with the HOA board. Michigan law required HOAs to provide homeowners with an opportunity to be heard before assessing fines, and I was going to use every legal avenue available to me. I sent the letter via certified mail and waited. The hearing was scheduled for the first Wednesday in December at the community center, a small brick building near the neighborhood entrance. I showed up 15 minutes early with a printed copy of my arguments and photographs of my garage, showing just how unobtrusive the tire storage was. The board consisted of 5 people: Margaret, the president; Dennis Crawford, the vice president; Linda Patterson, the secretary; Robert Hughes, the treasurer; and Susan Mitchell, a member at large. They all sat behind a folding table at the front of the room, looking at me like I had just insulted their mothers. Margaret called the meeting to order and asked me to present my case. I stood up and laid out my argument as clearly as I could. I pointed out the vague language in the bylaws, the minimal visibility of the tires, and the unreasonable financial burden of renting a storage unit. I showed them the photographs. I even brought up the fact that at least 3 other houses in the neighborhood had visible items in their garages, including one guy who had a whole motorcycle repair operation going on. Mr. Crawford on Oakwood Drive has a motorcycle in his garage that I can see every time his door is open, I said, pointing at Dennis, who stiffened in his seat. How is that different from my tires? Margaret did not even blink. Mr. Crawford's motorcycle is a vehicle, not a vehicle part. There's a distinction. That's a completely arbitrary distinction, I said, feeling my frustration building. And besides, the bylaws say excessive. 4 tires are not excessive. Linda Patterson, the secretary, leaned forward. She was a thin woman in her late 40s with glasses that made her eyes look too large for her face. The board has the authority to interpret the bylaws as we see fit. We've determined that your tire storage violates the spirit of the rule, even if you want to argue about the letter of it. That is when I realized I was not going to win this argument through reason. The board had already made up their minds before I even walked into the room. They voted 4-1 to uphold the violation, with only Robert Hughes, the treasurer, voting in my favor. He was a quiet guy in his 60s who looked uncomfortable the whole time. The fines would start in 7 days if I did not remove the tires. I left the community center furious. This was not about maintaining property values or keeping the neighborhood nice. This was about control. Margaret Whitmore got a thrill from enforcing petty rules and making people's lives difficult. I had seen her type before. People who peaked in high school and spent the rest of their lives trying to recapture that feeling of power by bossing around anyone they could. That night, I started researching Michigan HOA law. I learned that homeowners could challenge HOA decisions in court, but it was expensive and time-consuming. I also learned that HOAs could place liens on properties for unpaid fines, which could eventually lead to foreclosure. I was stuck between paying for a storage unit I did not need or racking up fines that could threaten my home. I decided on a compromise. I moved the tires to my basement. It was not ideal because the stairs were narrow and awkward, and I would have to lug them up and down twice a year, but at least they would not be visible. I took photographs of my empty garage and sent them to Margaret with a polite note confirming that I had complied with the board's decision. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I got another letter. This one informed me that during a follow-up inspection, Margaret had observed evidence of tire storage in my basement through my window. The letter claimed that this was still a violation because the bylaws prohibited storage of automotive parts on the property in a manner that could create unsightly conditions. Apparently, she had walked up to my house and peered through my basement window into my private space. I was beyond angry at this point, I was livid. I called Margaret immediately, not even bothering to keep my voice calm. "You looked through my window, into my basement. That's trespassing." I was conducting a routine inspection from the sidewalk, which is common property, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "And I could clearly see the tires. They need to be removed from the property entirely. The basement is inside my house. You can't tell me what I can store inside my own house. The bylaws give the board broad authority to maintain community standards. If you have a problem with that, you're welcome to take it up with your attorney." She hung up on me. I stood there in my kitchen, staring at my phone, wondering if I had somehow fallen into an alternate dimension where basic property rights did not exist. I did exactly what she suggested. I hired an attorney. His name was Paul Jacobson, and he specialized in property law and HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Traverse City, in one of those old brick buildings that had been converted into professional spaces. Paul was in his early 50s, with graying hair and the kind of calm demeanor that came from dealing with ridiculous situations on a daily basis. "Let me get this straight," he said after I had explained everything. "They're trying to tell you that you can't store tires in your own basement." "That's exactly what they're saying." Paul leaned back in his chair and shook his head. "That's not going to hold up. HOAs have authority over external appearances and common areas, but they can't regulate what you do inside your home as long as it's legal and not creating a genuine nuisance. 4 tires in a basement are not a nuisance. So what do? We send them a cease and desist letter explaining that they're overstepping their authority. If they continue to assess fines, we can file for an injunction and take them to court. It'll cost you some money upfront, but if we win, and we will, they'll have to pay your legal fees." I authorized him to send the letter. It went out the next day, 3 pages of dense legal language that essentially told the HOA board to back off or face legal consequences. I felt a small sense of satisfaction when I imagined Margaret reading it. The satisfaction did not last long. Instead of backing down, the HOA doubled down. They sent me a response through their own attorney, some guy named Richard Helms who worked for a firm that specialized in defending HOAs. His letter argued that the bylaws gave the board broad discretion, and that my tire storage, even in the basement, violated the community standards. They continued to assess daily fines, which were now up to $700 and climbing. Paul filed a motion for an injunction in Grand Traverse County Circuit Court. The hearing was set for late January, which meant I had to endure weeks of uncertainty and mounting fines. In the meantime, I moved the tires to my buddy's house in a different subdivision. His name was Kyle, and he thought the whole situation was hilarious. "Dude, you're going to court over tires," he said, laughing as he helped me carry them into his garage. "This is the most Michigan thing I've ever heard. It's the principle of it," I told him. "If I let them get away with this, what's next? Are they going to tell me I can't keep food in my refrigerator because it might smell? Fair point. Hey, if you win, you should make them pay for a beer fridge as emotional damages." Kyle always knew how to lighten the mood, but the stress was getting to me. I was sleeping poorly, worrying about the legal bills and the possibility that I might actually lose. Margaret had turned my life into a nightmare over something so trivial it was almost funny, except it was not funny at all when you were living through it. The court hearing in January was surprisingly brief. The judge, an older woman named Sandra Reeves, listened to both sides and asked pointed questions. When Richard Helms tried to argue that the HOA had broad authority to regulate homeowners, Judge Reeves cut him off. "Counselor, Are you seriously arguing that your client has the authority to dictate what a homeowner stores inside their private residence? Your Honor, the bylaws clearly state. I've read the bylaws. They say nothing about basements or interior storage. This is a clear overreach. I'm granting the injunction. The HOA is prohibited from assessing any further fines related to this issue, and all existing fines are to be rescinded. Furthermore, the HOA will be responsible for Mr. Zimmerman's legal fees. We're done here. I could have kissed Judge Reeves. Paul shook my hand and told me we had won a solid victory. The HOA would have to pay his fees, which had already reached $3,000, and they could not bother me about the tires anymore. I walked out of the courthouse feeling like I had just won the lottery. Margaret, apparently, did not take the loss well. Over the next few weeks, I noticed her driving past my house more frequently, always slowing down as if she were looking for something new to cite me for. My lawn was perfectly maintained. My mailbox was regulation. My trash cans were stored out of sight. I gave her nothing to work with, but that did not stop her from trying. In February, I got a notice about a dead branch on one of my trees. In March, it was a complaint that my house number was slightly faded and needed to be repainted. Each time I complied immediately, not giving her any ammunition. It was exhausting, but I was determined not to let her win. Then came the snowstorm. It was the second week of March, and Michigan got hit with a late-season blizzard that dumped 18 inches of snow overnight. The roads were a mess, and the whole county was under a state of emergency. I spent the morning clearing my driveway with my snowblower and then helped a few of my elderly neighbors with theirs. My truck handled the snow like a champ, the winter tires gripping the ice and slush without any issues. Around noon, my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize, but I answered anyway. "Hello, Mr. Zimmerman. This is Margaret Whitmore." Her voice had lost all of its usual smugness. She sounded stressed. "I need your help. I'm stuck in the snow on Riverside Road near the entrance to the subdivision. My car won't move, and the tow companies are all backed up for hours. I saw your truck earlier and thought maybe you could pull me out." I stood there in my kitchen, holding the phone, trying to process what I had just heard. The woman who had made my life hell for months, who had cost me thousands of dollars in legal fees and stress, was now asking me for help. The irony was so thick I could taste it. "You want me to tow you out?" I said slowly. "Yes, please. I've been sitting here for over an hour and it's freezing. I'll pay you if that's what you want." 1,000 sarcastic responses ran through my mind. I could have told her to call her attorney. I could have suggested she rent a tow truck the same way she had suggested I rent a storage unit. I could have just hung up. But I am not that kind of person, and as much as I disliked Margaret, I was not going to leave someone stranded in a blizzard. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, I said and hung up before she could respond. I grabbed my coat, gloves, and a tow strap from the garage. The drive to Riverside Road was slow, my truck plowing through the unplowed streets with ease. I found Margaret's car exactly where she said it would be, a silver Honda CR-V buried up to its axles in a snowbank on the side of the road. She was sitting in the driver's seat, her face red from the cold, looking miserable. I pulled up in front of her and got out. The wind was brutal, cutting through my coat like it was not even there. Margaret rolled down her window and I could see the desperation in her eyes. "Thank you for coming," she said, and for once, there was no condescension in her voice, just genuine gratitude. "Pop your hood and put it in neutral," I told her, all business. "I'm going to hook up the tow strap to your front axle." I worked quickly, attaching the strap to her car and then to the hitch on my truck. The wind was howling and snow was blowing sideways, but my hands were steady. I climbed back into my truck and put it in four-wheel drive, slowly applying gas. The tires gripped the snow, and I felt the weight of her car resisting. I gave it a little more gas, and the CR-V lurched forward, breaking free from the snowbank. I pulled her about 20 feet onto a clearer section of road and then got out to unhook the strap. Margaret climbed out of her car, slipping slightly on the ice. "Thank you so much. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come." "You would have waited for a tow truck," I said, coiling up the strap, "or called one of the other board members." She looked down, and I could see the shame on her face. "I deserve that. Look, Mr. Zimmerman, I know we haven't exactly seen eye to eye on things, but I really do appreciate this. Can I pay you for your time?" I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to take her money just to make a point, but a bigger part of me wanted something more valuable. "I don't want your money, Margaret, but I do want you to leave me alone. No more inspections. No more letters. No more looking through my windows. I keep my property nice. I follow the rules. Just let me live in peace." She nodded slowly, and for the first time since I had met her, she looked genuinely contrite. "You have my word. I'll talk to the board. We'll leave you alone." "Good. Drive safe." I got back in my truck and drove home, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. I had done the right thing, but I also knew that Margaret's word might not mean much once the snow melted and her embarrassment faded. March turned into April, and to my surprise, Margaret kept her promise. The letters stopped. The drive-bys stopped. I did not hear a single word from the HOA for weeks. I started to relax, thinking that maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was over. Then I found out what Margaret had been up to instead. She had shifted her focus to another homeowner, a single mother named Rachel who lived 2 streets over. Rachel had painted her front door a shade of blue that was apparently not on the approved color list, and Margaret had launched a full-scale campaign to make her repaint it. I heard about it from Kyle, who heard about it from his wife, who was friends with Rachel. "She's getting hit with the same crap you dealt with," Kyle told me over beers at his place. "Daily fines, threatening letters, the whole 9 yards. Rachel can't afford a lawyer like you could. She's talking about just selling the house and moving." That made my blood boil. Margaret had not learned anything. She had just moved on to an easier target, someone who could not fight back. I could not let that happen. I called Paul Jacobson the next day and asked him if there was anything we could do. He told me that if multiple homeowners were willing to come forward with complaints about the HOA's enforcement practices, we could potentially file a class action lawsuit, or at least put enough pressure on the board to force changes. I started reaching out to other homeowners in the subdivision. It turned out that Rachel was not the only one. There was Tom, who had been fined for parking his work van in his driveway overnight. There was Jennifer, who had been cited for having a vegetable garden that was supposedly not in keeping with the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood. There was Mike, who had been threatened with fines for installing a solar panel on his roof. The list went on and on. We organized a meeting at the community center, intentionally scheduling it for a time when the board was not meeting. 23 homeowners showed up, all of them with stories of petty harassment and overreach. We shared our experiences, vented our frustrations, and then started planning. Paul attended as well and explained our legal options. "The most effective approach is to vote out the current board and elect new members who will take a more reasonable approach to enforcement," he said. "Under Michigan law, you have the right to call a special election if you can get 20% of the homeowners to sign a petition. In a subdivision of this size, that's about 35 signatures. We got 57. It took us 2 weeks of door knocking and phone calls, but we did it. The petition was submitted to the board in late April, and the special election was scheduled for the first week of May." Margaret fought it every step of the way. She sent out a newsletter to all the homeowners claiming that the petition was the work of a small group of malcontents who wanted to turn the neighborhood into a free-for-all. She held a meeting to defend the board's record, but only her closest allies showed up. The tide had turned against her, and she knew it. The election was held on a Saturday morning. We set up voting booths in the community center, and homeowners came throughout the day to cast their ballots. By evening, the results were clear. Margaret, Dennis, Linda, and Susan were all voted out. Robert Hughes, the only board member who had voted in my favor during my hearing, was the only one who retained his seat. 4 new members were elected, including Rachel, who ran on a platform of fair and transparent enforcement. I did not run for a seat myself. I had no interest in being part of the HOA board. I just wanted to live my life without constant harassment. But I did volunteer to help the new board rewrite the bylaws to make them clearer and less prone to arbitrary interpretation. We spent the summer working on it, holding town halls to get input from other homeowners, and by September, we had a new set of rules that everyone could live with. The new bylaws included specific definitions for terms like excessive and unsightly. They required photographic evidence for any violation and gave homeowners 30 days to correct issues before any fines could be assessed. They also prohibited board members from conducting inspections alone, requiring at least 2 members to be present to prevent the kind of targeted harassment that Margaret had engaged in. Margaret moved out of the subdivision in August. I heard through the grapevine that she had bought a condo in a different part of town, one without an HOA. The irony was not lost on anyone. Dennis and Linda moved out shortly after, and Susan just stopped showing up to neighborhood events. Of the old guard, only Robert remained, and he became the treasurer again under the new board. The fall and winter that followed were blissfully quiet. I swapped my tires in November without incident, storing the all-seasons in my garage where they belonged. No letters arrived in my mailbox. No one peered through my windows. The neighborhood felt like an actual community again, instead of a police state. In December, Rachel organized a holiday party at the community center. It was the first neighborhood event in years that actually felt welcoming. People brought food, kids ran around playing games, and there was a genuine sense of camaraderie. I brought a case of beer and spent the evening chatting with neighbors I had barely spoken to before, all of us bonding over our shared relief that the Margaret era was over. Kyle cornered me near the snack table, a grin on his face. "So, you're a neighborhood hero now. How does it feel?" "I'm not a hero," I said, grabbing a handful of pretzels. "I just wanted to store my tires in peace." "Yeah, but you stood up to the tyrant and won. You inspired a whole revolution." "That's pretty heroic if you ask me." I had help, a lot of help, and honestly I wish it had never been necessary in the first place. True. But you know what the best part is? Margaret called you for help when she was stuck and you actually helped her. That's some next-level maturity right there. I would have left her in the snow. No, you wouldn't have. Okay, you're right. I would have helped her, but I would have been way more smug about it. We both laughed, and I realized that Kyle was right about one thing. The whole situation had taught me something about myself. I could have let my anger and resentment control my actions, but instead, I had chosen to do the right thing, even when it was not easy. That did not make me a hero, but it did make me feel like I had held onto my principles in the face of pettiness and spite. The new year came and went without incident. The snow fell. I drove my truck with confidence, and my tires sat in my garage exactly where they were supposed to be. Life in Pinewood Estates had returned to normal, or at least as normal as life in an HOA-controlled subdivision could be. In February, I got a thank you card in the mail from Rachel. It was a simple card with a picture of a snowy landscape on the front, but the message inside was heartfelt. She thanked me for standing up to the old board and for helping her find the courage to run for a seat herself. She wrote that the neighborhood felt like home again, and that she was grateful for neighbors like me. I put the card on my refrigerator, right next to a photo of my truck pulling Margaret's car out of the snow that Kyle had taken without me knowing. He had given it to me as a joke, but I kept it as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes the right thing to do is help someone even when they do not deserve it. A reminder that power can corrupt, but communities can heal. And a reminder that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to say no to injustice, even when that injustice is about something as small as 4 tires. Spring arrived, bringing with it warmer weather and the return of green grass and blooming flowers. The neighborhood looked beautiful, and for the first time since I had moved in, I felt like I was truly part of a community rather than just a resident under constant surveillance. In late March, I swapped my tires again, putting the all seasons back on and storing the winter tires in the garage. I did it in broad daylight with my garage door wide open, and I took my time, enjoying the sunshine and the satisfaction of doing something so ordinary without fear of repercussion. A few neighbors walked by and waved. One of them, Tom, the guy with the work van, stopped to chat. "Getting ready for summer?" he asked, leaning against my driveway. "Yep. Another winter survived. How's the van situation working out?" Tom grinned. "No problems at all. The new board said as long as it's parked neatly and not commercial advertising, it's fine. I can actually use my own driveway now. It's amazing what reasonable people can accomplish." Amen to that. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing in particular, just 2 neighbors shooting the breeze on a nice day. It was such a simple, normal interaction, but it meant the world to me after everything I had been through. That evening, I got a call from Paul Jacobson. "Xavier, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. Margaret Whitmore's attorney contacted me today. Apparently, she's considering filing a lawsuit against several former board members, claiming they conspired to defame her character during the election." I felt my stomach drop. "Are you serious? Can she do that?" "She can file anything she wants, but it won't go anywhere. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation, and everything that was said about her during the election was documented fact. She's just bitter about losing power. I wouldn't worry about it. Are any of us named in the suit? Not yet. It's mostly just noise at this point. But I wanted you to know in case she tries to drag you into it. If she does, we'll deal with it, but I doubt it'll come to that." Paul was right. The lawsuit was never filed. Margaret was just lashing out, trying to regain some sense of control over a situation that had completely escaped her grasp. I felt a pang of pity for her, but it was brief. She had brought all of this on herself through her own actions. Summer was quiet and uneventful, which was exactly what I needed. I spent weekends working on my house, doing small improvement projects that I had been putting off. I built a deck in my backyard, installed new lighting in the kitchen, and even planted a small garden with tomatoes and peppers. The new board approved everything without hassle, and I submitted the required forms more out of respect for the process than out of fear of violation. In July, the neighborhood had a block party. It was Rachel's idea, and it was a huge success. We closed off one of the streets, set up grills and picnic tables, and spent the afternoon eating, drinking, and getting to know each other better. Kids played in the street. Adults stood around talking and laughing, and the whole thing felt like something out of a nostalgic movie about small-town America. Kyle showed up with his family, and we manned one of the grills together, flipping burgers and hot dogs while our neighbors lined up with plates. "This is nice," he said, watching the crowd. "You guys really turned this place around. It was a group effort." I just happened to be the loudest complainer. Hey, someone had to be, and look at the result. Everyone's happy. Well, except Margaret, but she doesn't live here anymore, so who cares? I almost feel bad for her. Almost. Don't. People like that never change. She's probably terrorizing her condo neighbors right now, complaining about how someone's doormat is half an inch over the line or something. We both laughed, and I realized that Kyle was probably right. Some people were just wired to find problems where none existed, to exercise control for the sake of control. Margaret was one of those people, and nothing I could have said or done would have changed that. The best I could do was protect myself and help protect others from her overreach. As the summer wound down, I started thinking about the upcoming winter. I had my snow tires ready to go, my truck was in great shape, and I had zero concerns about storing anything in my garage. It was a strange feeling, not having that low-level anxiety hanging over me. For the first time in years, I felt completely at ease in my own home. In September, I got a surprise visit from Robert Hughes. He knocked on my door one Saturday afternoon, and when I opened it, he was standing there with a sheepish expression on his face. "Robert, hey, what's up?" "Xavier, I wanted to stop by and apologize. I should have done this a long time ago, but better late than never, right?" I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "Apologize for what?" "For not standing up to Margaret sooner. I knew what she was doing to you was wrong. I knew it was wrong when she did it to Rachel and Tom and all the others. But I just sat there and let it happen because I didn't want the conflict. I voted in your favor that one time, and then I just kept my head down. That was cowardly, and I'm sorry." I looked at Robert, this quiet man in his 60s who had clearly been carrying guilt for months, and I felt a wave of empathy. "Robert, you did vote in my favor. That took guts, especially when the rest of the board was united against me. You can't beat yourself up for not doing more." Margaret was a force of nature, and standing up to her came with consequences. "Maybe, but you stood up to her. You fought back. And because you did, a lot of people are better off now. I should have been braver." "Well, you're here now, and you're still on the board helping make sure we don't end up with another Margaret. That counts for something." Robert nodded, and I could see the relief on his face. "Thanks, Xavier, I mean it. If you ever need anything, you let me know." We shook hands, and Robert walked back to his car. I stood on my porch for a moment, watching him drive away, and I felt a sense of closure. The whole ordeal had affected so many people in different ways, and we were all still processing it, still healing from the damage that one person's need for control had caused. October brought the first frost, and I started preparing for winter. I checked my snowblower, stocked up on salt for the driveway, and made sure my truck's maintenance was up to date. The routine was comforting, a return to the normal rhythms of life in northern Michigan. In early November, I got a call from Paul Jacobson again. This time, the news was unexpected. "Xavier, I thought you'd want to know. The State Attorney General's office has opened an investigation into Margaret Whitmore and the old HOA board." "What? Why?" "Turns out they were misappropriating HOA funds. One of the new board members was going through the financial records and found some irregularities. Margaret and Dennis were paying themselves consulting fees that were never approved by the homeowners. It's a relatively small amount, maybe $15,000 over 3 years, but it's still embezzlement." I sat down, trying to process what Paul was telling me. So she wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was actually stealing from us. Looks that way. The AG's office is still investigating, but if they find enough evidence, there could be criminal charges. I'll keep you updated." Over the next few weeks, the investigation unfolded. It turned out that Margaret and Dennis had set up a consulting company and had been billing the HOA for management services that were never actually provided. They had hidden the payments in the annual budgets under vague line items, and because most homeowners never scrutinized the financials, they had gotten away with it for years. The total amount was close to $18,000, split between the two of them. In late November, Margaret and Dennis were both arrested and charged with embezzlement and fraud. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People were shocked, angry, and vindicated all at once. The woman who had terrorized us over trivial violations had been breaking the law herself the entire time. The trial was set for the following spring, but in the meantime, Margaret and Dennis both faced the reality of their actions. Their mugshots appeared in the local newspaper, and the story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power in HOAs. Several news outlets picked up the story, and I even did a brief interview with a reporter from the Traverse City Record-Eagle, explaining my experience with the board and how the community had fought back. December came, and with it, the first major snowfall of the season. I swapped my tires one Saturday morning, working in my garage with the door open, the winter tires going on the truck and the all-seasons taking their place in the corner. It was a simple task, one that I had done dozens of times before, but this time it felt like a victory. I had fought for my right to do this, and I had won. That evening I sat in my living room with a beer, looking out the window at the snow-covered street. My phone buzzed with a text from Kyle. "Dude, did you see the news? Margaret got arrested. Justice is real." I texted back. "Yeah, I heard." Crazy how it all turned out. Kyle, you should write a book about this. How I defeated my HOA and accidentally uncovered a crime ring. It would be a bestseller. I laughed and set my phone down. Kyle was being dramatic as usual, but he had a point. The whole situation had been so absurd, so over the top that it almost did not seem real. But it was real, and it had happened, and I had lived through it. The holidays were peaceful. The new board organized a food drive and a toy collection for local families in need, a stark contrast to the old board's focus on nitpicking and control. The neighborhood felt united in a way it never had before, bound together by the shared experience of overcoming adversity. In January, I received a letter from the Attorney General's office asking if I would be willing to testify in the trial against Margaret and Dennis. I agreed without hesitation. This was not about revenge or petness. This was about accountability. They had abused their positions, stolen money, and made people's lives miserable. They needed to face the consequences. The trial took place in March, almost exactly a year after I had pulled Margaret's car out of the snow. The courthouse in Traverse City was packed with homeowners from Pinewood Estates, all of us there to see justice served. The prosecution laid out the case methodically, presenting bank records, emails, and testimony from the new board members who had discovered the fraud. When it was my turn to testify, the prosecutor asked me to describe my experiences with the old board. I told the story of the tire storage ban, the harassment, the legal battle, and the eventual community uprising. I explained how Margaret had used her position to target anyone who questioned her authority, creating a climate of fear and control. The jury listened intently, and I could see the disapproval on their faces. Margaret's attorney tried to paint her as a dedicated volunteer who had made some mistakes, but had always acted in what she believed was the best interest of the community. It was a weak defense, and the jury did not buy it. After 3 days of testimony and deliberation, they returned a guilty verdict on all counts for both Margaret and Dennis. The sentencing hearing was held 2 weeks later. Margaret was sentenced to 18 months in prison, with the possibility of parole after 9 months, and ordered to pay restitution of $9,000 to the HOA. Dennis received a similar sentence. Both of them also faced probation and community service after their release. As I sat in the courtroom and watched the judge hand down the sentences, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, that justice had been served. Satisfaction that the people who had made my life difficult were being held accountable. But also sadness, because none of this had to happen. If Margaret had just been reasonable, if she had treated people with respect instead of viewing them as subjects to control, none of us would have ended up here. After the hearing, several of us from the neighborhood went out to dinner at a local restaurant. Rachel, Tom, Jennifer, Mike, Robert, and a few others gathered around a big table, and we toasted to new beginnings and better days. The mood was celebratory, but also reflective. We had been through something together, something that had tested us and ultimately brought us closer. "Here's to Xavier," Rachel said, raising her glass. "The man who wouldn't back down over a set of tires and ended up changing everything." Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment. I didn't do it alone. We all did this together. "True," Tom said, "but you were the spark. You stood up first, and that gave the rest of us the courage to stand up too. That matters." We ate and talked for hours, sharing stories and laughing about the absurdity of what we had been through. By the end of the night, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for these people, my neighbors, who had become friends and allies in the strangest of circumstances. Spring turned into summer, and life in Pinewood Estates settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new board continued to manage the subdivision with fairness and transparency. Homeowners felt free to make reasonable improvements to their properties without fear of arbitrary enforcement. The community center hosted regular events, and the neighborhood genuinely felt like a place where people wanted to live, not just a place where they were stuck. In June, I was working in my garage when a car pulled up in my driveway. I did not recognize the vehicle, a newer model sedan, and I stepped outside to see who it was. To my surprise, Margaret Whitmore got out of the passenger seat. She looked different, older and more tired, her hair grayer and her posture less confident. A man I assumed was her husband stayed in the driver's seat, watching nervously. "Mr. Zimmerman," she said, her voice quiet. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, but I wanted to talk to you if you have a minute." I considered telling her to leave, but curiosity got the better of me. "All right, what do you want?" She took a deep breath, and I could see that this was difficult for her. "I wanted to apologize for everything. The way I treated you, the way I treated everyone in the neighborhood, it was wrong. I was so focused on control and order that I forgot about basic decency and respect. I hurt a lot of people, and I'm sorry." I stood there, trying to gauge whether her apology was genuine or just an attempt to make herself feel better. "Margaret, I appreciate you saying that, but an apology doesn't undo the damage. You cost me thousands of dollars. You made my life hell, and it turns out you were stealing from all of us the whole time. I know, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I've had a lot of time to think about my actions, and I regret them. I've been seeing a therapist, trying to understand why I behaved the way I did. Apparently, I have some control issues." She laughed bitterly. "Understatement of the century, right?" "What do you want from me, Margaret?" "Nothing. I just wanted to apologize face to face. You pulled me out of the snow that day when you had every reason to leave me there. That act of kindness has stuck with me. It made me realize how much of a monster I had become. So, thank you for that." And I'm sorry." She turned and walked back to the car before I could respond. I watched as they drove away, and I stood there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. Margaret Whitmore, the woman who had been my nemesis for so long, had apologized. It did not change the past, and it did not erase the harm she had caused, but it was something. That night, I told Kyle about the encounter over the phone. "She actually apologized. That's wild." "Yeah. I don't know if it changes anything, but at least she seems to understand that what she did was wrong." "Do you forgive her?" I thought about that question for a long time. "I don't know. Maybe someday, but not yet. She has to live with the consequences of her actions, and so do I." Forgiveness isn't something you can just hand out because someone asks for it. It has to be earned. Fair enough. Hey, at least you can say you got the last word. I guess so. Summer faded into fall, and I prepared for another winter. The cycle continued, predictable and comforting. I swapped my tires in November, storing them in my garage without a second thought. The snow came, and my truck handled it beautifully. Life was good. On a cold evening in December, I was sitting in my living room when I got a text from Rachel. The new board was organizing a neighborhood potluck for the holidays, and she wanted to make sure I would be there. I texted back that I wouldn't miss it. The potluck was held at the community center, and the turnout was incredible. Nearly every household in the subdivision was represented, and the place was packed with people, food, and laughter. I brought a casserole that my mom had taught me to make, and it disappeared within the first hour. As I stood near the dessert table, talking to Tom about his plans to expand his business, Rachel approached with a smile. "Xavier, can I steal you for a second? There's something I want to show you." She led me to the front of the room, where a small plaque had been mounted on the wall. It read, "In recognition of the homeowners who stood up for fairness and justice in Pinewood Estates, may this community always remember that power belongs to the people, not to those who abuse it." "We had it made as a reminder," Rachel said. "A reminder of what we went through and what we accomplished together. You were a big part of that, Xavier. We wanted to make sure it was acknowledged." I stared at the plaque, feeling a lump form in my throat. "Rachel, this is too much. I just wanted to store my tires." She laughed. "Yeah, but you didn't back down when it would have been easier to just comply. You fought, and because you fought, the rest of us found the courage to fight too. That's worth remembering." The evening continued with games, music, and the kind of easy camaraderie that comes from shared experience. As I drove home later that night, the streets lit by Christmas lights and the snow falling gently, I reflected on everything that had happened over the past 2 years. I had bought a house in what I thought was a quiet subdivision, only to find myself embroiled in a battle against a tyrannical HOA president. I had been harassed, fined, and pushed to the edge of my patience. But I had fought back, and in doing so, I had helped transform an entire community. I had made friends, learned valuable lessons about standing up for what was right, and discovered that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they worked together. The snow tires sat in my garage, right where they belonged, a symbol of everything I had fought for and everything I had won. And as I settled into my warm house, surrounded by the comfort of my own space, I felt a deep sense of peace. The battle was over. The community was healed. And I could finally, truly, just live my life. That is all anyone really wants in the end. To live in peace, to be treated with respect, and to have the freedom to make simple decisions without interference. It had taken a fight to get there, but it had been worth it. And if I ever found myself in a similar situation again, I would not hesitate to stand up and fight once more. Because some principles are worth defending, even if the fight is over something as small as 4 snow tires in a garage.